In this video, I'm going to show you my adjustment for Urdhva Dhanurasana, or upward bow, sometimes known as wheel. I'm also going to cover the foundation of that pose, or the entryway into that pose, which is Setu Bandhasana, or bridge pose. Okay, so if you have time to work with somebody before they get into it, I would recommend doing that, because adjusting somebody deeper into a back bend that is probably at the foundation not safe is going to hurt them, or potentially over time hurt them. So typically before I adjust somebody, I take it from the ground. In the idea of observation, the feet are really important here. So you want the feet hips distance, okay? Where do the feet end up in relation to the front of the mat and the back of the mat is one of those questions that was answered years ago by saying you should be able to touch your heels with your fingertips. Now, I don't teach that because our proportions are all so different. What if your fingers are long and your femurs are short? It doesn't work across the board. If it works for you, great, but it's not going to work for everyone, because for me, when I do that, my heels end up way behind the line of my knee. And if I lift my hips, go ahead and lift my hips, your hips in that position, this is not a great position for bridge or Urdhva Dhanurasana. So essentially, you want your feet hips distance, and you want your shins as much as possible in a straight line from the knee to the top of the foot. So with here, I would move it back just a little bit. Okay, now from here he's going to lift his hips up. I want to see what he's doing in his bridge pose, because what he does in his bridge pose is going to be magnified, or, a lot deeper when he gets into his Urdhva Dhanurasana. So a lot of times, because we have tightness in the front of the hips and the hip flexors, the femurs, or the hip bones, externally rotate to move, not the hip bones, but the thigh bones, to move around the tightness in the hip flexors. That's not what we want. In yoga, over time, we've said we don't want to engage the glutes in back bends. I don't think that's true. You should definitely engage your glutes. They're a big muscle in your body, but you just don't want to over-engage them in external rotation in a back bend. That's when you close off the space around the sacrum. Rest. Good. Lift the hips back up. The purpose of bridge pose for me, as a prep for Urdhva Dhanurasana, is to learn how to use your legs. Okay? So the hamstrings are actually the muscles that bend the knee, right? That take that knee into that bent position. So I want him to learn how to use his hamstrings in bridge. How you do that is think about isometrically moving your feet towards your shoulders. Nice. He lifts his hips up just a little bit more. Inhale. And then exhale, draw your ribs towards your frontal hip points. Good. So my adjustment for bridge is to make sure the hamstrings are working. They're not working anymore. They're not working anymore. There we go. And his ribs are drawing in. Rest. Woo! And yes, they should be like, whew, because it's hard work. All right. Urdhva Dhanurasana. He lifts his hips up. He makes sure, you don't put your hands there, just leave them there. He makes sure that his hamstrings are working. Let me feel the hamstring work. There it is. When the hamstrings work, it actually pulls the pelvis more into a neutral position. He takes his hands next to his head. Now he comes to the crown of his head. This is important because for most people, this will be a more effective pose if he turns his hands out just a little bit more, especially tight shoulders. Then from here, he lifts his head up off the ground and starts to straighten his arms. He doesn't need to straighten his arms all the way. Now, if you find that your student is pretty open, his armpits are over his wrists, shorten the stance just a little bit. I stand from the side, make a fist with both of my hands, and take them, my forearms, right underneath his mid to his lower back, but more like the mid-lower back. I let him sit on this arm just a little bit. That'll lower his pelvis, and then I peel my forearms apart. Feels good? Nice. So this is really helping to elongate the lumbar spine and open the shoulders. And then slowly come on down. Lots of talking. One more Urdhva Dhanurasana adjustment. Go ahead, plant the hands next to the head. Make sure the feet are in the right position. He lifts to the crown of his head to just reassess, hug the elbows in, turn the hands out a little bit, then he lifts all the way up. I like this one because it helps when people are really externally rotating, which is not what we want. I step over and use my thighs to hug in. Then from here, I take my hands right to the center of his upper back and I push away as I use my legs, hug them in, and pull his legs that direction. And this traction is really going to help him elongate the low back. Good. And come on down. Again, making sure you're using that third principle of communicating with your students. I never adjust Urdhva Dhanurasana in a class setting when somebody has an injury. However, I will work with that student on the foundation first and work them into Urdhva Dhanurasana. And a lot of times they don't feel that pain anymore because the pain comes from the overlifting of the pelvis. So if you don't feel like you know exactly what to do with a student with injury, just don't adjust them. It's going to be much better for them to learn about how they can prevent the pain before you start deepening the pose. Enjoy this one as long as the student feels good.